Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us for our virtual MLK formal program. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Center for Multicultural Student Services here on the campus of James Madison. I am Valerie Director, and I have the privilege and the honor to serve as the director of the center. We're so excited to have you in this platform and to be able to continue celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King. Tonight, we want to say thank you to all of our senior leadership, all of our students, all of faculty and staff, as well as our Harrisonburg community, family, friends, and certainly last but not least, our keynote speaker for tonight, Dr. Michelle Montgomery. Greetings. Each year, we've had the fortune of celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King, and not just Dr. King alone, but all of the civil rights leaders of our past. These intended moments certainly give us opportunity to pause, reflect on our history, take a look at where we are in present time, and with the hope being that we will continue to be encouraged as we move forward towards a better future. And certainly as we look over this year, we have an enormous amount of work that has been presented to us as the civil rights movement has not ended. We are, in some ways, I personally felt we were just beginning. We were starting over. And perhaps there is something to say about that, in that we have to end one part of that legacy, embrace where we are today as a nation, and build a new plan. We have to regroup with all the energy, all of the internal light and the fortitude, likened to that of the spirit of those who marched before us. And I know that they are the bridges that brought us over, and they too are saying, enough is enough. So many people gave their lives, their blood, their tears, not for us to be where we are today, but to make this a better place. What will we leave the generations behind us? And I certainly have challenged myself with that question throughout the year, from the pandemic itself, COVID 19, the loss and the grief as a result of that, and just in the backdrop, all of the racial unrest. I call it the racial pandemic. And now that we're in a brand new year, 2021, it seemed that it started also with its own set of just unbelievable occurrence of events on January 6th. Each one of us must take that baton that Dr. King and others left behind for us and again retweak, refresh, renew, and continue to march forward to a better tomorrow. We can get through this together. And certainly, also, as I reflect upon this year, there was much loss of life to the pandemic and some other instances, killings, senseless killings. But right here, we lost a soldier that we had right here in Harrisonburg, someone who was about civic engagement and social justice and the rights for all individuals. And that was our very own Stan Macklin. I just wanted to take a moment in this MLK program to acknowledge Mr. Macklin. He was a pillar in the community. He certainly supported every MLK program since I've been here, since 2006. Mr. Macklin was the former chair of the Martin Luther King Jr. Way Coalition, and the renaming of that street was ever so important to him, and so many others. I had the privilege of working on a subgroup with him to change that from Carlton to Martin Luther King Jr. Way. He's also the founder of the Harriet Tubman Coalition right here in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Previously, we were able to honor Mr. Macklin right here in Wilson Hall in our at a former program. He was given the Distinguished Award from the Xi Delta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, the MLK Community Service Award. And I can remember him being so excited that night. He brought his whole family. They came from in town and out of town. And he said, we've got to do some more work together. He was being honored, but yet he was already planning. How can we build this community? How can we make Harrisonburg a better place? He was thinking about projects. So in honor of his work and so many others and countless others who are still in our Harrisonburg community, let us be mindful that none of this work is in vain and that it's going to take all of us working together. Now I'm going to stop reflecting and do what I've been assigned to do. And that is, I have the privilege and the honor to introduce the president of James Madison University, our very own Mr. Jonathan Alger. Jonathan Alger is the sixth president of James Madison University, a public comprehensive university in Virginia with 22,000 students. Under his leadership, JMU developed a vision to be the national model of the engaged university, engaged with ideas and the world. A strategic plan focusing on engaged learning, community engagement, civic engagement. President Alger is a nationally recognized scholar and speaker on higher education law and policy. President Alger previously served in positions at Rutgers University, the University of Michigan, the American Association of University Professors, the U.S. Department of Education, and a major international law firm. He currently serves on the national boards of the American Council on Education, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and Campus Compact, and at the state level on the Northern Virginia Technology Council. President Alger, I don't know where you find the time to do all that. He currently co-chairs, in addition, the task force on the fusion of STEM and liberal arts and humanities for the Council on Competitiveness. President Alger previously served as chair of the board of the National Association of College and University Attorneys and on the advisory council for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at the National Institutes of Health. He graduated with high honors from Swarthmore College and honors from Harvard Law School. Now, those are all the formalities that I was assigned to read. But I'm just going to say, President Alger, it's been a pleasure getting to know you since you've come to JMU and working with you. And I have known President Alger to be a man who understands why diversity matters, who understands why we must work together. He has a good heart and a heart for students and faculty and staff to make sure that we too are a part of building a more inclusive campus. So without further ado, President Alger.
Thank you so much, Valerie. You're always so kind and gracious. And thank you to you and your entire team for all the work that you have done to make this possible. It's great that we can at least be together virtually tonight. So I send greetings to all of you and look forward, hopefully, to being in person again a year from now at this event. And I want to just share 3 quick lessons from Dr. King's life as we set up this evening's program. You all know, of course, that Dr. King was a prophet as well as a civil rights leader, and that his words and deeds have inspired generations in our country and indeed all across the world to fight for the causes of racial justice and peace. And we need to remember those words and deeds, of course, as Valerie said, more than ever at this very difficult time in our history. Our students might ask themselves what difference they can make when the challenges seem so large and so intractable. But at JMU, we are not afraid of big challenges, right? We talk about being the change that we want to see in the world. And that's what Dr. King's model provides for us, is how do you do that? It's interesting when you look back at history, Dr. King was only 26 years old and serving as pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church when the Montgomery bus boycott was being planned. And King was new to Montgomery. He was the least experienced member of the planning committee, but they came to him and they asked him to lead. And he wasn't sure that he was ready, but because he was called to lead, he did. And it was a moment that catapulted him, of course, to national attention and really changed the trajectory of the American civil rights movement. So if you think about that for a moment, Dr. King, as he starts this work, is not much older than our current students at James Madison University. And think about the impact that he made. So the first lesson I think that we can learn from Dr. King is that when you're asked, say yes to opportunities. And when called upon, don't be afraid to take action. Dr. King actually came from a politically engaged family, but his experience still was very much in its infancy with activism when he started with the bus boycott and became really the public face of that work. But he was fully committed to the cause. And the second lesson I think we can learn from Dr. King here is that he didn't do this work alone. Valerie mentioned there are a lot of people that we really are celebrating tonight. It's not just Dr. King. This is the legacy of many people, civil rights activists and others whose names we don't know, who've contributed to this work. And I think it's important to recognize that we are not in this work alone. And we have to be willing to look for those allies all around us. And some of them may not be obvious, who are willing to come together to work on these important issues. And we need one another for strength and resilience. And that's happening right now at our own university. I might just add, many of you know we have a task force on racial equity that is hard at work right now. They represent a very broad cross-section of our community, faculty, staff, students, community members, alumni. And I've asked them to really look carefully and recommend bold steps for the short, medium, and long term that will make our institution more inclusive, that will address these issues of racial justice that are so important to our university and our community and our country. And it's deliberately a very large and inclusive group to model that kind of work because no one person can do it alone. And then the third lesson that I want to just remind us tonight from Dr. King is that, as Valerie noted, the work is never done, right? That when he agreed to lead the bus boycott and then saw that work and the buses were desegregated, he could have said, okay, well, we've mission accomplished. But instead, he said, what's the next challenge? He never rested on his laurels. He always knew that there was more work to be done in terms of civil rights and racial equality. And I think we forget sometimes that Dr. King, like all of us, would get tired and discouraged at times, but he nevertheless persisted and he kept asking, what's next? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves as well. Valerie mentioned it's easy to get discouraged right now if you have the news on too much and you look at events like what happened in our own country and our own nation's capital on January 6th. What a powerful reminder that hatred and ignorance and racism are still very much a part of our country and our world. And yet, we know that there are good people all around the country that want to come together and to continue this important legacy. And that's, I think, the work that we have to remember tonight, that dream that shines a light in the darkness on a path that will lead toward justice and reconciliation and peace. There's always going to be resistance to change, right? You have seen that at every turn in the fight for civil rights and equal opportunity. But it makes it that much more important that we work together, that we say yes to opportunities, and that we never give up. So this holiday is not just a reflection, but it's also a call to action. So tonight, and I know our keynote speaker is going to inspire us to think about answering that call to action. It's great to be with all of you tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And let's think together about what we can do to act to make the world a better place. Thanks so much.
President Alger, thank you so much for your reflection and sharing your welcome to all who are with us tonight, and all of the reminders that it's going to take all of us to to do this work. I also have the pleasure now to introduce another phenomenal person, our mayor, the Honorable Dina Reed, our second term mayor of Harrisonburg City. And she's going to bring us some remarks and welcome on behalf of the city, the friendly city, Harrisonburg. Mayor Reed.
Thank you. Good evening. On behalf of the City of Harrisonburg and City Council, I would like to wish everyone a happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. To my good friend Valerie Gant, CMSS, President Alger, and all of the JMU faculty and students, it is always a pleasure to fellowship with you. Now, I'm not going to take up too much time because I am eager to hear the keynote speaker, my sorority sister, Dr. Michelle Montgomery. But I would like to say this. All day today, we have been celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as we do every year at this time. But this year is different. This year, as we celebrate the man of humility and unity, we are celebrating him in a time that seems to be taken right out of his time of 1964. We still remain a country deeply divided. Black men, Black women, and Black children continue to be in harm's way in 2021. But JMU, I am hopeful. I believe, just like Dr. King said, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. I'm hopeful because we will have our first Black female vice president, whether or not the current president accepts it, inaugurated into office on Wednesday. I'm hopeful because we have more Black leaders in Congress and state offices and serving as local elected officials than we have ever had before. Dr. King believed in America's ability to change. Now our academic institutions, our classrooms, our churches, and our communities are becoming wise to the understanding that the promised land is a place where we can only arrive at in a spirit of unity and solidarity, the likes of which this country has yet to see. So JMU, let's continue to work together in solidarity and truth and usher in this bright new day ahead. Thank you for having me.
Mary, thank you so much for your remarks and that reminder that progress has been made. More work is still needed. But yes, we honor and celebrate the next um, president and vice president coming in. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing a VIP, another VIP tonight. And her name is Anastasia Wheeler. She is a JMU student. She's a senior. She is a marketing assistant, student assistant in the Center for Multicultural Student Services. And she is going to introduce our keynote speaker for the night.
Thank you, Ms. Gant. Good evening. My name is Anastasia Wheeler, and as Ms. Gant said, I am a senior communication studies major with a concentration in public relations and a minor in sociology. I'm a marketing student assistant, and I serve on the Student Advisory Council for the Center for Multicultural Student Services. I proudly serve as the former president of Women of Color, a resident advisor, and a member of the Public Relations Student Society of America on JMU's campus. Tonight, I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker for Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Week, Dr. Michelle Montgomery. Dr. Michelle Montgomery is professor of interdisciplinary arts and sciences in American Indian Studies and ethnic, gender, and labor studies at the University of Washington Tacoma. Montgomery enrolled Halawa Saponi, descendant Eastern Band Cherokee, is also the assistant director for the Office of Undergraduate Education and the Indigenous Curriculum and Community Advisor for the School of Education. Her research focuses on indigenizing and decolonizing the climate justice narrative, environmental ethics connected to indigenous peoples' place-based identities, and eco-critical race theory to eliminate racial and environmental oppression. She is the Interim Director of Undergraduate Studies at the University of Washington Seattle Department of Bioethics and Humanities. Montgomery is also a proud graduate of an HBCU, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, and is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Please join me in welcoming the 2021 Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Week keynote speaker, Dr. Michelle Montgomery.
Pilahuk Wadu, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the lands and the traditional territory of the Indigenous Peoples of Virginia, which is also former territories that also included the Cherokee Nation. I like to acknowledge the traditional territories in which I work and research and play, which is of the Puyallup Nation, as well as the Indigenous nations of the state of Washington. But most importantly, I would like to just say Pilahuk Wadu for everyone who's joining us, to know that all of you are in my prayers, my thoughts, heavy hearts, navigating the stillness that we're experiencing in regards to the pandemic, and most importantly, trying to unpack what we've witnessed on January the 6th of 2021. So what I want to talk to you about today is what really touches me about Dr. King's memorial speech. And that is this whole concept that in his speech, he said, he envisions justice rolling down like water. And so today, rather than talk about some of the negative atrocities that has happened, I want to talk about where we are and how do we move forward as peoples of color? How do we come together? And what I would love to share with you is my envision. I envision hope through the reciprocity of self-love and love. And with that, I'd like to share a story about myself. You know, I stand on the shoulders of a great family tradition. We all as undergraduates attend historically Black colleges and universities. I am too a legacy of suffrage, of not only of African bodies that were stolen, but also Indigenous peoples who were genocide due to settler colonial beliefs and narratives of colonizing what we call Turtle Island. I also stand on the shoulders of all those who love me from Wayman African American Methodist Episcopal Church in Enfield, North Carolina, as well as St. Paul Baptist Church, where my grandfather served so diligently for many, many years. So what I want to ask of you is to remember in all of this, that there is always hope. No one else defines your hope, but those that you love and those that love you. And so with that, I'm unapologetically, I always ask the question when I think of the pioneers that have navigated this light for us. I want to honor the African-American women who turned Georgia blue. I want to honor our Vice President-elect, Kamala Harris. I want to honor the women of color who has so graciously invited me to be a part of such a special space. But most importantly, I want to ask you, when you're navigating the world and we're questioning, how do we move forward? How do we continue to uplift the legacy of Dr. King? We must also ask ourselves, how do we forever, Black and brown bodies, be unapologetic? Unapologetic to me is always asking, what does justice demand? Justice demands for us being legacies, for many people who have paved the way for us to stand on their shoulders. It's to remember truly the ones that love you, those that support you, those that are fighting the fight. Fighting the fight with what I'm reminded of by my great aunt today is how do we spread the reciprocity of self-love and love through spirituality? What has kept us going through hundreds of years of oppression is our spirituality. There's nothing more important than really truly acknowledging deep down inside, what is that trigger that kept the light burning? I also want to talk about, when we talk about the reciprocity of love, it's really about allowing a safe space for suffrage to speak. We don't need people to tell the stories for us. We have our own stories to tell. But what has happened as we've navigated these years and this journey, particularly in spaces of academia and PK through 12, is that we've been taught for so many years that the process of learning, navigating the world around us, should be emotionless. I say that in this time of uncertainty, while we're still holding on to the lights of hope, that we should always remember that reciprocity of allowing the suffrage to speak, unapologetically serving each other. And what do I mean by that? It goes back to also another legacy that I am very proud to be of. I come from a very long line of educators that have always viewed themselves as students, forever students. And when I use the word educator, it's not a job, it's a calling. And that's the difference. And so for many of you that are part of this audience, students, staff and faculty, community members, parents, partners, friends and colleagues, what we do as educators in these spaces, as a critical race theorist, we want to carve out spaces to create that spirituality, to recreate that reciprocity of love, to uplift our students of color to remember that you are loved and that your true loyalty is to remember that you are loved, and they're the ones who have molded you and guided you through some of the hardest flames that you could possibly ever imagine. Unapologetically remember that love conquers all. Unapologetically remember that when you stand in great traditions on the shoulders of so many people, remember that people really cannot touch you even if they put their hands on you. That's how many ancestors that you've had that navigated this world for you, all throughout what we have often viewed as having no hope at all. What I also would like to unapologetically always remind us is that this nation of what they call the United States and what we call differently as Indigenous peoples, and as a mixed race person, I carry that light of a nation that was built on the bones of my ancestors, and many of my ancestors, the backs of slaves. So I know that the resilience that many of us carry is untouchable. It's actually magical. And when you think about the reciprocity of self-love, it's something that even in the darkest racist hours, no one can touch, because your spirituality is what makes you unbreakable. What I will also like to remind you unapologetically, we are all in this fight together. But most importantly, be a freedom fighter. I am, unapologetically. Unapologetically, never allow someone to control your actions, your thoughts, the way you navigate your learning environments, the way you create your journey for self. Unapologetically, always remember to decenter the status quo. And what I mean by that is we cannot always, although it's hard to do, take the negativity and make it the epicenter of our discussions, right? We can unpack it. We can do as what Dr. King has said, create safe spaces so that justice rolls like water. But most importantly, always remember that there is a time to always do what's right. Always do what's right. And when I think of the spaces in which we're navigating, when I think of Mr. George Floyd and Mrs. Breonna Taylor, the hope lies within that justice must prevail. History must never repeat itself. And in the state of Virginia, we have a long legacy of history that is often not spoken out loud. It's spoken in special moments in time. But the state of Virginia has a long history of healing. And we, as people of color, we're always forgetting sometime or another that spirituality is stronger than any type of repercussion that anyone can throw at you. The other thing that I think is so important as we navigate this special day is to also remember the self-love. Ask yourself, what is self-love? What is loving unconditional? What does it mean for us to be part of special congregations in our church communities, in our work communities, in our family communities. And I can remember attending service with my grandfather at St. Paul's Baptist Church, being ushered to the front so that he could keep a keen eye on me because I was always in mischief, and reminding me with a kiss on the forehead, you're loved. And I will say, in that very moment, when I saw on January the 6th, what was happening to our nation's capital, I remembered that strong hand that walked me down the aisle of that church and sat me on that front bench and told me that I was loved. And in that moment of disbelief, I knew instantly then that my spirituality, my indigeneity, my Blackness is the strength that no one can ever break. And it's something that we always need to remember. Our ancestors were strong. They survived hundreds and hundreds of years of injustice. And today in 2021, we still face the realities of often being erased, discursive practices, excluding our voices, actions excluding our voices. But the hope, as our mayor from Virginia area has stated tonight, there's a lot of change that's happening in our new leadership. One of the things that I would like to read to you that always come to mind is a person who I definitely admire on so many different levels, is Dr. Cornel West. And he reminded me of so many different occasions of what is a leader? What does that mean to be a leader? And Cornel West states, if your success is defined as being well adjusted in injustice and well adapted to indifference, then we don't want successful leaders. We want great leaders who love the people enough to be unbought, unbound, unafraid, unintimidated, and to tell the truth. So part of that reciprocity of love is to tell the truth of justice. The truth of justice truly is allowing the suffrage to speak. But in this day and time, we also have to ask ourselves what Du Bois would ask us. And that is, what does honesty do in the face of deception? What does honesty do in the face of deception? And I would say the honesty is reaching back, looking for those who've lost the light, reaching back, helping to relight the light for those that need a path to recarve and define what hope means to them in so many areas of uncertainty. Ask ourselves, what does it mean when we say enough is enough? What does it mean when we say that our spirituality is what uplifts us and create a bond so strong that is unbreakable? When we ask ourselves about the promises of democracy, we have to remind ourselves, what does justice demand? How do we navigate that question? How do we come together? How do we see beyond being raced? How do we see beyond the atrocities of what we've witnessed in this 4-year of this former leadership that is now transitioning? How do we move beyond so much violence? But the most important thing I want us to remember unapologetically is to always know that love and service to your people is the most important process to keep our hope, to navigate toward hope, and to really keep the center of something that my mentor, Dr. Wildcat, always reminds me. And that is, what does it mean to have reciprocity of place? What does it mean to really dig deep into your spirituality? What does it mean to have a multi-generational space? And I really miss seeing the younger people. And I think they need to be a part of the conversation now. It's important for us to include PK through 12 in the conversation of justice. It's important to know that they are being protected, that they're being educated from voices of experience and hearts. What's also left out of the conversation of justice is, how do we rebuild the heart? We know that knowledge has an inherent amount of responsibility. Knowledge is only important in the ways in which we share it. Love becomes important when we share. Knowledge is about loving. Hoarding knowledge is not loving. So in order to inspire our future leaders, in order to protect our youth, in order to continue what many of us do, the other mothering, the other fathering, the other auntie, the other uncle, right? The things that we do to create the safe spaces that we've done from generation to generation as people of color, it's important to keep that legacy moving forward. It's so important to do that. Speak truth to power. My mentor, Dr. Raynor from the University of Washington Tacoma, has always reminded me that I am important. And so I'm passing on that special message to you that you are important. Your voices matter. Being in a space is about being seen and heard. Being in a space of learning, particularly in universities environments and other institutions of practice, is about having the cultural capital of being able to share your voice. And we know that many spaces are not created for us to have these special privileges. And so we have to carve them out, unapologetically carve them out. The most important thing as a Southerner, I'm originally from North Carolina. I'm now residing in the Pacific Northwest. And the ways that we navigate racialized and polarization in the Pacific Northwest is totally different than what I have experienced in North Carolina, just a different form. We need to be able to acknowledge truths. We need to be able to acknowledge untruths. We also need to be able to go back to what Dr. King has said on so many occasions. There's always time to do what's right. There's always time to call out what's not right. And I think the legacy of so many of our civil rights leaders, it's worth uplifting. It's important to hold on to. You know, as former First Lady Michelle Obama has always reminded us as women of color, when they go low, we go high. And that's the hope. It's also the hope of self-love. Self-love takes you in so many different directions. And when I think of the different lessons that I've learned in life, the reciprocity of love, it always brings me back to, what are the issues of integrity? What is your moral compass? My moral compass navigates the space very simple. My moral compass looks at life from two lenses. You're either not a racist or you're racist. There is no gray in between. And I think a lot of people may feel uncomfortable about that statement, but it's a truth. So I think what we need to do moving forward is we need to call people into conversations. We need to have real conversations about racialized dynamics. We need to be able to heal on both sides. We need to be able to have conversations in safe spaces and really talk about the synergies of hope. How do we redefine hope in learning environments? How do we bring our students back to campus and our campus communities and so many stakeholders that we support and uplift as part of our institutions? How do we create these safe spaces so that people feel seen, they feel heard, and most importantly, they feel safe? How do we prevent so many things that have happened around us? In particular, Mr. George Floyd, in particular, the Breonna Taylors, in particular for me as well as the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We know that justice can be unpacked in so many different layers. We know that we, as brown and Black bodies, we have a very strong interconnection. We have seeds that are rooted in the soils around us, and they cannot be erased, nor can they be eliminated. I would also like to ask everyone that when we're navigating this light, to be real with yourself. to be real with yourself and see what's around you and just say out loud, the truth hurts. We have a long way to go, but we have a lot of people that are on board to make these things happen. It also goes back to the responsibility of love. Love has a huge amount of responsibility. And when we think of the world, the racialized world, the political world in which we live in, the responsibility of love is not an easy task. It's a slow moving task that we must handle with great care. The reciprocity of love and self-love. It is so easy for us to lose sight of that. And I ask you to remember that. I ask you to always ask yourself, what am I doing to provide self-care in these moments? What am I doing to remember those sheroes and those heroes that have consistently uplifted us? What are my dreams? What are my dreams for the future leaders of our communities, of our nations? How do we redefine with them together the meaning of hope? And as a person who sees that we as Black and brown bodies are in particularly connected to place, we must, unapologetically, we must remember history of place. Place-based history is how we often get into some of these negative situations that we're in now. We allow history to repeat itself. The more that we uplift history of place, the more we can prevent negative acts to repeat themselves. Because it's like many of my elders have taught me. Once you breathe life into words, words can only be forgiven, not forgotten. Just like the air we breathe is sacred. So if the air we breathe is sacred, and everyone breathes the air, regardless of your race, your ethnicity, your intersectionalities, your socioeconomic status, you're all sacred. And it goes right back to reciprocity of love and the reciprocity of self-love. Unapologetically embrace that. The responsibilities that we have to each other goes back to, how do we serve the people? How are we servants of the people? Culturally, I'm taught two things: to remember the teachings of our more than human relatives and to protect them. If we remember the history of place, then we remember that there is so much healing that we need to do to take care of the history of place. It's not about just saying. It's not about just bringing it into the classroom. It's not about just acknowledging people on one day. It's about always acknowledging our heroes, our sheroes, and history of place every day. To breathe life into history is to breathe life into justice. To breathe life into justice, you're recreating a new world of hope that really is about love. It's about loving yourself. It's about self-love. It's about serving those people that you love. You know, when I think of attending church with my grandfather was Baptist, my grandmother was a member of the AME church, and it's the same type of love and the resilience that it creates to be loved by your community, to be reminded of the struggles of your people, to be reminded that both Black and brown bodies, we have similar struggles, and we're very interconnected, very, very interconnected. So how do we bring all of these different types of synergies together to make it real for our future generations, for the 7 generations, to actually witness justice, as Dr. King says, the envision of watching justice roll down like water. And part of that justice is going to happen really soon. And I'm really excited to see the hope and change that is going to take place. But we also must remember, what do we do to lead? Leading is not always being in the limelight. Leading is those that push all the others forward. It's paying it forward. And that's why I am so honored to be with you here tonight, because I have a special calling. To be in space where I can carve safe spaces for our future leaders to dialogue about some of the most sensitive topics that they may not feel so special about sharing in a non-work environment or being able to share their opinions out openly. But creating safe spaces to me is so important. It's also important to me to honor what is critical geography? What does that mean to have critical geography? What does that mean to really talk about the conduit of voice? If we forget the places in which we walk, if we forget the places in which our ancestors have put blood, sweat, and tears into to have us on their shoulders, then we're not serving our people. But I know the audience that we have tonight, you've celebrated such an important person that has carved out the way for me to be exactly where I am today, and many more, that we all are unapologetically asking the question, what does justice demand? And in this stillness of COVID, we're also searching deeper than anyone could ever imagine, to redefine what does it mean to call people into healthy conversations. How do we have healthy conversations? Conversations about things on our campuses, in our communities that may not have been discussed. But after January the 6th, there's no more let's put it on the back burner. We need to have the conversations now. We need to have the conversations to define a just world. And in that just world, we have to look around at all the different things that are happening to us environmentally. If we're definitely connected to place and history has a special message for us, then we have a lot to work on. We have a lot to work on in ways in which we should want our elders to know that we've remembered our teachings. We should also want our more than human relatives to know that we're listening and we're carrying their stories with us. And for me, for my grandmother, Velda Carroll, who also went to college, and the story she used to tell me of how unsafe it was for a woman of color to attend a school, it really brings hope in my mind, in my heart. It's a glow to know that my grandmother navigated spaces that I never imagined she could navigate. That my great-grandmother Odia was also a school teacher. And she also was the person who ingrained in my very soul, never forget who your people are and where you come from. She used to always remind me, never forget that love will always protect you. Never forget that the places in which I navigate, that I am from a strong bloodline of two communities that are extremely resilient. And never forget that you need to pass the message on. So the whole purpose of getting back to the reciprocity of self-love and love and knowledge, it should be shared. That's a gift. It's a gift that should always keep giving. So I would love to have an engaging conversation with you about justice and ways that we can move forward. I would love to have a conversation with you about spirituality and what does that mean to bring your whole selves forward all the time. Just not your work face, just not your home face when you're at home, but how do you bring your whole self forward to demand acts of justice, but also to uplift our future leaders. So Pila Hagwado, everyone, for joining me.
Wow, Dr. Montgomery, I am happy to be here and I am ecstatic. First, if we were in person, we would give you like a huge round of applause. So I want to just offer that to you and say thank you so much for your profound words. Thank you for speaking on behalf of BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, for us to come to a space where we can also be empowered as well as receive knowledge and just in a space to challenge our thinking. So I am very appreciative of you being in this space and allowing me to be in this space with you. So at this time, everyone, I welcome you all to hit the Q&A section on the Zoom screen, and please offer your questions and we will navigate through those questions within our time period. to do a Q&A with Dr. Montgomery. And we actually do have our first question. So someone asked, I was wondering, what does reaching back to help others find the light look like to you? How would you advise someone like me, someone of white European descent, to help people find the light again?
Pilahuk Wado for that question. And I think that, coming from a position of privilege, I think it's important first to acknowledge, what does privilege mean to you? How do you share your privilege? How do you create a safe space? So reaching back really is uplifting those that may not have the same privileges as you to navigate those same spaces. Creating opportunities for brown and Black bodies to actually have a voice, to be present, to be seen and heard, not just to be seen and not heard. And reaching back really is creating safe spaces as an ally. As a forever student, but also an educator, it's important that we're in these spaces. How do we introduce, information from people of color? Why is it that we always have to learn from the status quo or status quo type knowledges? And I think that it's important, and also for our allies to say, you're an ally, but you can't be a part-time ally. So reaching back is, do your children play with our children? Or do you just come to the table when we're writing grants or having special meetings? So reaching back is really allowing the younger generations to see that we are the same. Beverly Tatum, she wrote a book entitled "Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in a Cafeteria?" And she shared a story about 2 eggs. Her son wanted to know, what is the difference between a white egg and a brown egg? And so she brought the eggs home and she cracked them to show him that there's no difference. And I think, as a person of privilege, it's important to always educate as many people as you can that there isn't a difference. Being raced is something that was done on us based on a vision of slavery. We were created as bodies of culture, of human capital. So I think the more and more we keep that in our minds, the reaching back is educating those in the safe spaces that will accept what you're saying, that there's enough is enough, right? Justice says, justice demands that we must have equity and inclusion and diversity, not when it's palatable, not when it's popular, not when to ride the wave, but to always make sure that it's front and center.
That's so good. You better speak. You better listen. You better drop gems. As a millennial, I'm over here. I'm glad I'm on mute because you're getting all of the yeses and all of the hand waves and all that stuff. I want to jump. You talked a lot throughout your presentation to us and just throughout your speech to us about spirituality. So I also heard that you had a little Baptist in you just a little bit. So I'm sure that you had an experience where the usher told you to spit out the gum a little bit like that, or they were a little strict with it.
I would say, I navigated both churches. So my grandmother was AME and my grandfather was Baptist. And as you know, AME church is very structured. You stand up, sit down, you do this, that, and the other. And the Baptist church is, performative, right? And so I would say that, I'm very fluid. So I don't, in contemporary terms, view myself as a very feminine person. And so my grandfather would always ask me to go with him to church. And it was this thing of, don't tear up the church fan, sit there, be quiet, pay attention. But the spirituality to me is beyond the structured walls of a building, right? The spirituality to me is acknowledging that the creator is real, right? Right. When you believe things happen when they're supposed to happen, not in human time when we think they're supposed to happen, right?
Right.
Spirituality is also about, being very, gentle with negativity. Negativity will pull you down to the bottom of a pit, right? The whole purpose of saying somebody can't touch you, even if they physically put your hands on you, meaning that you are loved, where you come from, your people have you, people plural, right? Extended family. That's my spirituality. My spirituality is also having a special relationship with my more than human relatives, right? My spirituality is that I believe that we're all connected. What I feel in the same room with you, you may feel me. So the spirituality is that when we're in desperation of needing hope, of needing to find the light of hope, or making it brighter when it's gone dim, it really is coming together, letting people know, I'm here for you. I believe in you. You know, and I tell people all the time, the best gift outside of before the pandemic happened when we have to wear our masks, the best gift that you could give a stranger is a smile. It's free, right?
So good.
The best gift that you can give an elder is to acknowledge them, open the door for them. You know, it doesn't hurt to open the door for someone. It doesn't, you know, hurt to smile at someone. But my spirituality really is about, I am self-serving for my people. Self-serving to you. You're younger than me. And when you get a certain age, right, I've never been brought up to believe in I, me, my. I've always been brought up to believe in the we, right? Because that's why we, our people, survived the atrocities that tried to bring us down, because the we outshine the I, me, my, right? And that's my spirituality, right? Always look out for each other, always.
That's so good. I was gonna ask you, you kind of hit on it about how your spirituality has helped you find a sense of peace and foundation, given your background of being of Cherokee descent, AME, as well as Baptist. Just how's that helped you to find your sense of just peace and foundation through the work that you've done, just in general?
You know, as a mixed race person, my grandfather always kept me grounded. He says, you know, always remember who you are and where you come from. You can't choose your family, you're born with them. This is your bloodline, right? And so my spirituality really is, I pray. I pray every morning before the sun comes up, and I pray as the sun's going down. Even if it's cloudy, I go out and I pray because I'm grateful, right? And I think the act of being grateful, the act of being able to pick up the phone and call a 92-year-old aunt or 94-year-old aunt, or, you know, pick up the phone and call just relatives in general is a blessing. It is a blessing. When I think of what we were not supposed to be, we have accomplished the unimaginable. And it's the spirituality that's got us here. There's something greater than us. And I think we forget, and I'm not trying to, you know, blemish someone's beliefs or be disrespectful towards someone's belief. But, you know, I truly believe in spirituality that, you know, the power of prayer is something that I can't explain. There's something bigger than us. And the issue with us in times of uncertainty is that I think we really forget that love of spirituality, like regrounding yourself, right? You cooking for people, that's nothing but love. That is nothing but love. Sharing food, nothing but love, right? And that's spiritual. So I think that when we think of Christianity in a Western colonial context, spirituality is actually reading scripture, memorizing it. You can't commit sins. You do all these different things, right? But when I think of spirituality, it's really big. It's organic, right?
Yeah, that's good. We have several questions here, so I want to get through a couple for us. Okay, so you mentioned a sort of ancestral love and duty for people of color, particularly among Black and Indigenous people. What are your thoughts on balancing the comprehensive love with an equally present duty to push forward? And they said, thank you for your inspiring message today.
Pushing forward. You know, when I see, and I don't mean to talk about January 6th, because I think we've all, you know, we've twisted it all around like a Rubik's Cube and tried to figure out what was that all about, right? But we know what that's about. When I see those sorts of things happening in the world, I go, where's the love, right? Where's the love? And to move things forward is, if my great-grandmother and great-grandparents before that survived for me to be born today, and I have, you know, the privileges that I have, I can do the unimaginable. And when times get heavy, I think about all the things such as women's women of color's bodies were used as breeding vessels, right? When I think of the atrocities of settlers when they came on our territories, and the things that they did to us as Indigenous peoples and women, that's my hope, my drive. It's not built on anger. It's built on, what can I do to carve a safe space, a path, to remember my teachings, to uplift everyone. Never forget your history. When we stop remembering our history and honoring our history, it repeats itself every time, every time. So my hope is when I was seeing all this stuff happening, I started pulling out books, reading stuff, looking up stuff online, you know, and it goes back to a beautiful paper that's written by Bell, Brown versus Board of Education, when he talks about is separate equal. You know, and I go back to those readings and I question them one by one. What does that mean? And how do I get through that? But, you know, we're all equal. The problem is that some of us, for some reason, feel that we're better than each other. And we're not. It doesn't matter whether you have acronyms or not. Acronyms should never define who you are and where you come from, right? You're human first, right? And people of color, when we think of what hope is, it always is that question of, what does justice demand, right? What does justice demand? And you know, every day is a new day. So we have to, you know, we have to think of all the things that are going on in the world that we need to apply that justice lens to. It's like a large forest fire. And we have to take our skills and work on one set of that fire. And hopefully it's like the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
People will learn by example, right?
That's good. Our next question is, how do you tell a university that it's not the responsibility of Black and Brown students to do the liberation work, and it's not just the role of the multicultural office?
Now, this is going to be inappropriate, but I'm going to say it in a way. You can just tell them, you're not the diversity whisperer, right?
Well,
it is not your responsibility to unpack someone else's white fragility. It is not your responsibility to help soften up white privilege. When you take brown and Black bodies to try to soften up the privileges that everyone else has had around you, when you've had to fight for everything you have, it is very hard to navigate those spaces, right? And I think that it's taxing, because as faculty of color, you know, the bar is different for you. For people of color, the bar is different from you everywhere you go, right? It's like passing the hot potato around, right? And so then they want you to be the diversity person without even acknowledging that, you know, I have so many other things that it's important for me to work on. It's not, you know, it is not a person of color role to help someone unpack their white fragility. I think we need to call people into conversations and have real conversations and agree to disagree. I also truly believe that we're all entitled to our own opinions as long as they do not cause harm. But I think, you know, it's part of tokenization when we are placed in these positions to always, you know, fix this problem or go over here and represent this or go over here and represent that. If you really want to decolonize your institution, then the faculty faces should represent that. If you really want to decolonize your institution, there should be more funding in the diversity programs. If we really want to decolonize our institutions, then the spaces in which we have the scholarship in which students are utilized and should represent that diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that we need to be a part of the conversations, but I think it's a huge burden for people of color to actually have to carry that responsibility.
That's very good. Very good. Hey, you're in the room tonight, Dr. Montgomery. You are in the room tonight. Our next question would be, would you speak a little bit more about the power of a place and how important that it is for identity, to have identity and resilience? Thank you so much.
You know, the power of place is something that's just magical, right? Growing up in North Carolina, I can smell the tobacco walking down the pathway to our family farm. You know, and at one point of that pathway, I can also smell my Uncle Russell smoking a pipe. my identities are directly connected to place, right? As both navigating my Blackness and my indigeneity, there's a lot of identities that come with place, and place remembers you. It's your DNA. It's actually where you come from. And I think it's important to talk about power of place, because if your identities are directly connected to those places, then you have a reciprocity of responsibility to those places. There's a generational responsibility to those places. And that's why it's important for the histories of people of color should never be forgotten, because we have a responsibility to place, right? And I think that the ways in which I navigate that, it goes right back to my spirituality. It goes right back to that love, right? You know, that place, I was raised in these places that made me who I am today. And I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. My most memorable moments is not only smelling my Uncle Russell's pipe, but many of you who've grown up in the South, fireflies, right? Fireflies are magical. If, you know, and then when you're going back to the environmental issues, we know that more and more species of fireflies are at risk because of the types of agriculture practices, the massive amounts of deforestation that you happen in the East Coast, very, very few green spaces, right? And that's how I connect identity to place. They're relationships that I have with the ecosystems, right? The more than human relatives.
That's good. This will be our second to last question. Okay. I like the idea of inviting K-12 in restorative justice dialogue. How can we deal with school to prison pipeline while the system brings police officers with full military equipment in our school buildings?
I'm gonna have to pause on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll say this, you know, one, they're setting up a stigma, right? They want to recreate what Dr. King has been fighting in his time period, as well as Malcolm X, right? Police brutality. The first thing you have to do is get the police out of the schools. If you're trying to represent to our kids what they need to fear when they're outside of the school in the streets, police brutality, that's exactly what you're creating. We're creating a world of anxiety and post-traumatic stress for our youth. One, restorative justice, right? Pipelines to prison, that's a different form of slavery. Pipelines to prisons are now these capitalistic entities. They need brown and black bodies so that those that own the systems can make money. And I think the restorative justice should be coined in a concept of responsive justice, right? How do we flip the story around so that, you know, okay, going back to our neighborhoods, you know, from a critical race theory lens, you know, they create buildings and schools in black and brown bodied neighborhoods that look like prisons because they want them to get used to those spaces. You know, as my mentor would say, Dr. Wildcat, if you learn in a box, you think in a box. Place-based education, bring our kids outside, right? They need to be outside more, even if it's urban or inner city areas. We need to find ways for our kids to be outside of the four walls. The issue with police securities and things of that sort, to me, that's more of who, you know, it's the office of superintendent trying to hide behind the desk. That's not a we action, that's an I, me, my, right? If there's issues that we need to deal with in regards to creating community for our youth, then let's do it. Let's find a way of recreating those communities.
Gotcha. So our last thing, we had about 3 questions that talked about the terms cultural geography and more than human politics. Could you talk a little bit more about that if you would like to? If not, no problem. But that'll be our last question. And then I'll just ask you to give your closing remarks.
Well, you know, when I think of, you know, critical geography, it really goes back to history of place, right? When you think of the state of Virginia, currently they have listed 11 tribes. The Cherokee Nation is one of the tribes that was part of the Virginia area. I have lots of relatives that live in Virginia. Everywhere you go, you don't see any type of acknowledgement of black or brown bodies being historically connected to place. So if you erase us, then you're saying that we don't actually have value to those places when we know that we've been part of those places, right? Black and brown bodies. And the critical geography of that is really, what are the stories of place? What is the story of a university? What did it used to be before it was a university? how many Black and brown bodies have increased at your university to date, right? When we start talking about critical geographies. But most importantly, those relationships, what's the relationship to place, right? So when I think of where I grew up, I don't want the land to be sold because I don't want it to turn into these communities where Black and brown bodies can't afford to build homes there, right? That's another process of justice. So when I think of place, I think of that care and that reciprocity that come with place. So from a cultural lens, those are my relatives. So you have a relationship responsibility to place, and that's part of your identity, right? A lot of us believe, and it's not a pan-Indigenous perspective, I can only speak for myself and my friends and I have these conversations, you know, how can you own a relative, right? How can you own a relative? If what we call Turtle Island is older than us, how do you own a relative? I don't own my grandparents or my great aunts, right? So that critical geography is taken into that cultural context of what's those inherent connections to place, right?
Awesome. Dr. Montgomery, do you have any closing final remarks at all, or anything that you'd like to leave our participants with?
I do. I would like to say Pilahuk Wado for having me here. I would keep you, your families, and your extended communities in my thoughts and prayers during these time of uncertainties. Always be unapologetic. Always. Always wear in comfort the color of your skin. Always navigate the institutions by always asking yourself, what does justice demand? And more than often, what you see is real. So don't second guess yourself, but go back to that question of what does justice demand? Remember the reciprocity of love and self-love, and always serve the people.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Montgomery, we'd like to thank you once again for joining us this evening. We celebrate you. We really appreciate you. And on behalf of the CMS family and James Madison University, our students, faculty, and staff, we want you to know that we are so appreciative and we thank you. And if we can ever be of service to you, please let us know. To all of our participants, I want to thank you all for tuning in with us tonight. And I hope that you took the time to really just sit and listen in on what Dr. Montgomery was speaking about. She spoke about so many different pieces, from spirituality to talking about our cultural geography and our importance of place history. And take some time to just do some reflecting. Thankfully, this video will be posted on our JMU page, our YouTube page, and take some time to go back to listen to it. In the words of our great Dr. King, he said that in darkness, only in darkness can you see the stars. And so though we may have times around us that seem pretty dark, know that the light is coming. And in the words of Dr. Montgomery, continue to be unapologetic. And on behalf of CMS and myself, thank you all for attending.